Welcome into episode 104 of the Godly Young Men podcast. We have a very good episode today. Will's put together a fantastic outline on something that we've talked about friends before. We've talked about the value of friends. Episode 26, you have on here, choosing godly friends, right? Episode 83, combating loneliness. Episode 98, the dangers of being a follower. We've talked about some of these things before, but Will, how does this episode specifically differ from that?
Yeah, so we want to talk about kind of a biblical concept about being too closely associated with certain people. Unequally yoked is the phrase, and that's a biblical phrase. It's actually from 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 14, where Paul is telling the Corinthians, he says, do not be unequally yoked together with unbelievers. And he talks about for what communion has righteousness with lawlessness, what communion or what fellowship I think has righteousness with lawlessness, what communion has light with darkness. And he basically is telling them, don't be too closely associated with people who are completely different than you. Yep. Don't be unequally yoked. Unequally yoked, we don't use that phrase a lot, but essentially yoked, talking about the idea of two oxen that are kind of together going the same direction. He says, don't be unequally yoked. And so we want to talk about that with the episode today under several different terms. Obviously, there's the friend concept. As Joe said, we talked about that a good bit, so we probably won't spend as much time on that. But also with marriage, a lot of people say, it's a really good idea to marry a Christian and a bad idea to marry a non-Christian. We're going to get into a little bit later. Is it a sin to marry a non-Christian? Is this verse, 2 Corinthians 6:14, that says, do not be unequally yoked together with unbelievers, is that saying it's a sin to marry a non-Christian? We're going to talk a little bit about work, co-workers. Is there a point at which you're kind of unequally yoked with your co-workers who might not be believers? And so, yeah, just to kind of preview it a little bit, I think this touches a bunch of different areas in our life. Joe, so what I put on here just very quickly is what this is the idea of is two ideologically opposed people trying to be in a close relationship. Ideologically opposed. We're going two separate directions, and yet we're trying to kind of compromise and go in the same direction. And that's just not possible.
What it entails is you have to know the direction you're going and the direction you want to go. And that's going to be the foundation for all of these things. And I love in this outline how you put it together. Your mind immediately goes to, unequally yoked. Okay, so this is a marriage episode. No, not fully. Yes, we're going to get into that here in a moment, but this is about more than that. Like you said, I love how you said friends and your job and such. And so the idea of being ideologically opposed assumes you have an ideology that you're striving for. You know what the opposite of what you're going for is, and you are willing to take a stand. Where you see this go wrong is guys who don't really know what they believe. They don't really have any ideology that they subscribe to, and so somebody comes along and goes, well, I'm not a Christian. Okay, well, that's okay. You're a really nice person. So the ideology for them is they're chasing niceness. Mm-hmm. Well, the person fits with niceness. They're not chasing Christ. They're not chasing Christianity. They're chasing niceness. And so she fits in the ideology. She's not against it. So that's the thing. First thing that hits me is you have to understand when we're talking to ideologically opposed people. I love how you said that. You got to know your ideology. As you have on here, righteousness versus lawlessness, light versus darkness, Christ with Belial, temple of God with idols. We have nothing to do with one another.
And that's what Paul adds on to that. He gives several examples of these are things that are completely different than one another. Light and darkness, completely opposed. Christ and Satan, completely opposed. God's temple and idols, completely opposed. Righteousness and lawlessness, obviously. And so what Paul does when he gives examples like that and when he's asking questions like that over and over again that are obviously rhetorical, he's trying to prove a point by kind of almost in a way of burying you with these examples of it's obvious, it's clear that you should not be unequally yoked together with these people who are ideologically opposed.
So this brings us to the question.
The ultimate question.
The ultimate question. When we talk, initially it is marriage. That's the first one that comes to mind, right? That's what Paul is talking about in that context. So, Will, I'll ask you.
Of course.
Is it a sin to marry a non-Christian?
This is, again, you grow up hearing people, at least I did, I don't speak for myself, I don't speak for everybody, but basically saying you should marry a Christian. It's a really good idea to marry a Christian, really bad to marry a non-Christian. I never personally heard it is wrong for you to marry a non-Christian. It is a sin in God's eyes. And it's a bit of a controversial question. A lot of people have kind of different takes on it. But funny enough about this, my parents, who are fantastic, I've talked raved about how great they've been, great parents they were. My mom married my dad before he became a Christian. He was studying, and he was very open to it, but he got baptized, I think, 3 months after they got married again. I don't think they watched the podcast. They might get on to me for bringing that up. But my dad was not a Christian at the time. I know of several. I don't think both your parents were Christians, were they, or were they?
My mom was, but an errant. Like, she had basically fallen away at that point.
Yeah, so I'm going to give my answer, and I think my answer is yes. I do think it's a sin. And the reason being, Paul saying, do not be unequally yoked together with unbelievers. What do you think he's talking about? Like what else could he be referring to where it's like, okay, don't go to church with them. Well, they're not going to be going to church if they're unbelievers. Well, don't engage in any business with them. Okay, so you're saying that Paul's more concerned about your business relationships than the most important relationship you're going to have on this earth. Okay, well, Paul's talking about, like, it just doesn't make sense for Paul to use that, to say that. Like again, so he's talking about friends and friendship relationships. So you're saying that Paul is more concerned with who you're friends with than who you're married to. Like, say that out loud. It just doesn't make sense. So yeah, I mean, that's going to be my proposition, is that the answer to that is it is wrong. But Joe, you can convince me otherwise if you've got a different opinion. But
no, I'm looking at it here, and do not be bound. I'm looking it up to see. I believe that is the imperative. Yeah, there you go. It looks like it is. On the Greek side of it, I should have looked this up ahead of time. But yeah, I think this is a command,
you're saying.
Yeah, it's a command. Don't be bound together with unbelievers. And the kicker for me is exactly as you've been talking about. For what partnership have righteousness and lawlessness? What fellowship has light with darkness?
Is there any closer partnership in life than like?
This is the point. You don't understand marriage if you think that those two things can get along. You are completely opposed to it, and so. Boy, that's a tough one, because then you say, what does the repentance process look like? Well, we don't divorce. I don't think that's the case. People make all sorts of cases from 1 Corinthians 7. I don't think that's what it's referring to in terms of divorcing. I think you stay in the marriage. Obviously, God hates divorce. On the other hand,
and we know that from other places in Scripture where, like, if the believing spouse has an unbelieving partner, he does not tell them to get divorced. It's stay together, and maybe you'll be won by or maybe they'll be won by the conduct. So, it's not. I don't think it's a continual sin, because we know in Scripture that he says stay in the marriage.
But if it's an imperative from Paul, don't do it, and we do it, well, it's not really a sin. He just didn't want you to do it. Like,
just a suggestion. Like,
okay,
no.
So when he's talking about other things that are an imperative in terms of following Christ, do we treat them as imperative, or do we treat them as a suggestion from the Apostle Paul? It's difficult. Somebody's going to come in and maybe school us on the Greek. Again, I'm trying to do it on the fly here on my phone rather than on my logos on the computer. But you may come in and completely disagree with us, but I'm looking at it saying, okay, it is an imperative from Paul saying don't do it. He makes a very strong case appealing to something far greater than, like, when he says, what do light and darkness have to do with one another? It's that serious. What does righteousness and unrighteousness have to do with one another? Well, it's kind of a suggestion. It ain't with righteousness and unrighteousness. Nope. Would it be a sin for you to go hang out with, or for you to, and here's where you might go wrong as people may look at it. We'll get to the friends in a second, and I still think that this applies to friends to a certain degree, but what closer relationship do you have than marriage? It is a covenant in the eyes of God. If somebody's not following God, how can you have a covenant in the eyes of God when they don't follow God?
Right.
It doesn't make sense. The covenant and the union from the very beginning is starting from a cracked foundation, starting from a place of, like, we're not even ideologically on the same page with Christianity and following God. So how can I make a covenant to something that I don't fully believe in?
Joe, I want you to go off on this for a second. I'm going to skip down. I want to come back to kind of some of these questions I put on there about why it's such a bad idea. But I want you to kind of go off on the... it's okay. I can fix them. I know that they're not a Christian right now, but they're open to it. I'm sure if I study with them that they'll. But we really want to go and get married. But I know I can fix them, or like because I know that's what a lot of young men, especially if they find a girl who they are desperately in love with, beautiful, believes in God, but maybe is not a strong Christian, or maybe, like, again, very loosely believes in God and is just
community church
living however she wants. But man, you really want to marry her, and you're like, okay, I can fix her later on. What would you say to somebody who says that?
We were always told, like, don't ever go into marriage thinking you're going to fix somebody. Now, they will change. The question is, which way are they going to change? Here's my problem with it. If you're a godly young man and you're trying to marry somebody, we talked about this in the last episode, 250 years, right? You're establishing your family name, you're establishing a legacy, you're establishing the generations, and you go out and you marry somebody who... Yeah, I mean, I believe in God. Sure.
Yeah, I'll go to church with you.
I'll go to church with you, yeah. Like, that is not what we're looking for. We're looking for the woman who, if I die, can get my kids to heaven. That's what you want. And so the loose kind of, maybe I'm a Christian, maybe I'm not, that doesn't cut it. But the idea specifically of what you're talking about, the I can fix them, never go into marriage thinking you're going to fix them. I'm going to fix whatever it is. Well, I know he struggles with anger. I know, I'd say the same thing to women. I know he struggles with anger. And, one time he punched a door right next to my head. But I know there's good in him, and I know I can fix him, and he's going to change. And then they get in and he starts beating her on her. This happens. This happens. I have seen this happen where, man, you're convinced that you're going to be the one to fix them because there's good in them. And then they get in, and what do? They get even worse because then no constraints. I got you. We're in this relationship together. You're in a marriage, and it's going to take divorce to get out of it. And so people just spiral down. Don't ever go into marriage thinking you're going to be the one to fix them. And I would say on the other side, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Honestly, like you said,
you go off. I say go off. So
on the other side, there is something psychological about the person who always wants to go in and fix somebody else. I can fix them. It's it's a hero complex. I'll be the one to save them from themselves. I'll be the ones to fix them. You got to be very careful to not have that, to not bring that attitude into the marriage, because where does that end as well? You're always trying to fix them, or the hero complex. Where does that come from? That's a much deeper issue that I think needs to be dealt with ahead of time. So both sides of this, the fixing them versus you thinking you can fix them, I think is a real problem. I
was just thinking about Andy Bernard in The Office punching the wall and having to go to that anger management class or whatever. That's what made me think of a stupid sidetrack. Oh, man. No, but I do have another example for this, and I want to get to these questions. But here's my example. Something I've been doing in my job a whole lot lately, more often than I have been previously, is interviewing people. And when you interview somebody, you have a specific job in mind for them, a role in mind for them that you need them to accomplish. You have somebody who comes in and you kind of ask them questions about the role and kind of what, and they go, well, yeah, sure. I've done some of that, and I'm somewhat interested in that, and I'm open to doing that role, and I'm kind of open to getting there maybe eventually. Would we hire them? No. We would say, all right, man, have a great day. We'll reach out to you.
Right.
But we're not hiring them. Why? Because they're not ready for that role. That's not something that they are clearly not very enthusiastic for. That's not something that they truly want. Maybe they just showed up because they want a paycheck or whatever it is. We would hire somebody who's like, I'm the man for this, and here's why. I strongly believe in this role. I strongly believe that I can do that. Like all these things. Is that not what we're doing in marriage when it's like, again, the most important characteristic, quality of the woman you marry is like, yeah, I'm sort of interested in God. I'm kind of interested in being a Christian. I'll go to church with you. Sure. I don't mind. Like, that's just kind of where my mind went. Is like, you wouldn't hire that person.
Well, I love that. I love that. No, I was just thinking about from a Chick-fil-A perspective, like, so why do you want to join Chick-fil-A? I don't know. I mean, you guys do some cool stuff. Yeah, I'll come and cook some chicken, I guess. Like, if you're going to hire as the manager and you want them to be a part of something greater than themselves, they have to be able to share the vision and to say, yeah, this is why I like Chick-fil-A specifically. This is why they're different than Wendy's and McDonald's and things like that. Like, I'm committed to Chick-fil-A as a whole.
Yeah.
I look at the same, like, we're working for Christ, right? We are his bondservants. And somebody comes in and goes, yeah, I'll go into the back and cook some chicken. No. Are you a part of us?
Yeah.
Are you here? And this is part of the culture, and this is why yeah, sorry, go for it.
No, I was just saying, I interrupted you. I'm sorry.
No,
we literally have people who are like, yeah, I just kind of need a job. We don't hire those people.
Correct.
Because there's no intention there.
That's exactly it. They're not loyal to the brand, loyal to the company itself. And this is how you create a culture, is you have people that want to be there. Yep. And so how can you get a family, how can you as a man lead your family in a culture and we talked about that, a culture setter, right? When your wife is opposed to the culture itself that you're trying to create. How can you raise kids up unto the Lord when you have a woman who's home with them all day potentially, or she goes off and leaves them to public school, which is even worse, who can't even get them there? She doesn't even have the same vision. She's going in opposite directions from you. The kids are pulled right in the middle. Do they go south with mom or north with dad? I don't know. And so a lot of times they choose the path of least resistance, which is probably going to be south with mom.
Yeah. I want to go back to the idea of two ideologically opposed viewpoints. Because you could say, well, it's not completely opposed. Again, maybe I'm going this way and they're going this way. It's not total opposite directions. If you're not going the same direction, then you're in opposite directions. Like, regardless of the different degrees, it's like you're in the opposite direction. What I've got, some of these questions I have on here about like why it's such a bad idea and why it's just beyond the fact that we've kind of already established that we believe it's a sin and that it's not something you should do. Why it's just a bad idea. We've touched on a lot of these, but think about, I'm going to go to the second one. What does it mean for the happiness of your marriage? What will it mean when, and I'm a strong believer in the honeymoon phase can continue, but when the newness of the relationship wears off and you guys are you've been living together now for 2 years, and you're, again, kind of that, what's the word? Infatuation is kind of over, and you're in the daily doldrums of life, and that again, newness is gone. How much are you going to enjoy or how happy you're going to be in your marriage with somebody who is not on the same page as you about the single most important thing? Maybe you guys like all the same movies, you love to watch the same shows together, got the same music taste, all these things, but you disagree on the most important thing on this earth, and that is what you do for religion. What is that going to mean for the happiness of your marriage? You think you can skirt around that for 30 years? Probably not.
You're fighting an uphill battle every single time you get ready on a Sunday morning to go to church,
or every time you try to have a family devotional, like everything.
Correct, everything. And we're supposed to it has to be more than church. I love that you bring that point in. Every night where you go to open the Bible with your kids, where is she? Is she joining you? Oh, okay, I'll join you. I'll sing some of them. I guess she knows some of the songs. No, you want her. It's like, man, Dad's out of town for the night. We're going to continue with it because she believes in the vision. She understands it. I love that point about the happiness of the marriage. We already talked about the children. What does it mean for your children? The children are completely pulled. The third one you have on here, what does this mean for your enjoyment of life? Yeah, this is going to be a tough one when she's pulling on one of the things that should stand out the most about you, which is your Christianity. She's pulling that down, and you are constantly in a state of having to defend yourself, defend your beliefs, defend your actions in a Christian way from a woman who doesn't share the same values. And maybe she's not opposed to it, but you're still dragging a dead weight who doesn't want to join you in this.
Well, and the reason I differentiated this between happiness within your marriage and then just general enjoyment of life, I don't want to speak for you, but I would say for myself, my life, I really enjoy my life. And one of the big reasons I do is because my wife and I are synced up. We are on the same page. We're pushing for the same stuff. We're completely in line. And if we weren't, and you see couples like this, not even just in religion, but maybe in, home roles or parenting or whatever, they're just not completely synced up. Your life's a little bit more miserable. Your life is not quite as enjoyable when you and your wife are kind of on different pages about who knows what, fill in the blank. And so, even outside of your marriage, the kind of enjoying the drive into work or just really looking forward to spending time, like, I really enjoy my life, and it's because my wife and I, one of the big reasons, not the only reason, but it's because we're completely aligned. We're very synced up, and if you're not on this, I do believe that your enjoyment in life will suffer. Maybe not at first, but eventually.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you added this one because it's going to tie right into what you said. What does this mean for your sexual relationship with your wife? Christ is head. He's ruler over all parts of your life. I love that you brought in the roles in the home, the way that we treat the kids, the way that we raise them, the way that we just think about life in general, our sex life. All of those things come under the headship of Christ. So when he is saying this is what we prescribe and she doesn't care at all about that, when she is, when the roles in the home are like, we appeal to a higher authority in our roles, I can easily point to the scriptures and say, these are what the roles are supposed to be. She doesn't abide by that. So what difference does it make to her when she decides to be a major feminist? What difference does it make? She doesn't care because she's not playing by the same rule book. It's like if we both went out to play the game of baseball and she's playing by basketball rules and you're playing by baseball rules and you're going,
we're not playing the same game.
We're not playing the same game. Yeah, that's going to ruin your enjoyment in life. It will ruin your sex life because that is an expression of this. This is clearly with God. Read the book of Song of Solomon. You can look at the mystery that Paul talks about in Ephesians 5 with marriage. There's a mysterious element to some of these things. Sex is baked into the fabric of marriage, and if you don't have it based in God, then what are the rules sexually speaking? Where do you go from here? The modesty and the fidelity within the marriage, the monogamy within the marriage. There are no rules if you're not, and you go, oh, my wife isn't in all those things. My girlfriend's not in all those things. She believes down the line. At the end of the day, you will find cracks in your relationship. Maybe she syncs up, but the only reason she does is because you believe it. Therefore, you are her God. She's not appealing to a higher authority, and that's a real problem.
I would just say the emotional intimacy is what leads to really good physical intimacy. And again, if you're opposed on these things, your emotional intimacy can only go to a certain level. You're not going to be, once again, fully aligned, fully emotionally intimate because you disagree. Or maybe, again, she's kind of halfway bought in and you're fully bought in, and that affects the physical intimacy.
I can't believe I spaced this. I'm so glad you brought that up. I have my my intimacy pyramid.
Setting you up there.
There you go, my intimacy pyramid. And physical intimacy at the top. You know what the bottom is? The foundation of all? Spiritual. So if that's cracked, how much more are you going to be able to build? I love that point. Man, you're knocking it out of the park today. Set me up. Sending me those softballs, I suppose. But yeah, the intimacy is broken if you can't connect spiritually. And one thing we didn't have on here that I want to bring up. Go back to the Old Testament. What does God do? What does God tell the Israelites? do not marry outside of the Israelite nation.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, general guidelines. But this girl, this Midianite girl, she's a knockout. She's incredible. She actually believes a lot of the stuff we believe. She doesn't sacrifice her kids, nothing crazy like that. I mean, it's perfectly fine.
Example, yeah.
Excuse me? Is that what he said? That you can go out and marry a Midianite as long as she kind of buys into some of these things?
As long as she's really good looking? No, that's not what he said.
Exactly. Don't do it. You see, even before the nation is established, you see Esau, right? And what a horrible... He marries 2 different wives, and neither of them are of the family.
Solomon loved many foreign women, turned him into an idol
look
worshiper.
At all of the idolatry that takes place because, and time and again, what does it say? They basically married outside the camp. They went and they married the daughters of Midian. They married the daughters of the Philistines. They married the daughters of whoever it is. And they, as God's people, now we are God's people as Christians, they dilute the waters, and guess who ends up falling away? I didn't see a whole lot of the Philistines become Israelites. You see it occasionally with Rahab, you see it with Ruth. It does take place very, very rarely, and that's not done through marriage initially. That is them bringing in, Ruth is kind of, but Rahab is brought in because she saves them, obviously, with the spies and the whole situation, Joshua 2 and such. So completely different situation. Most of the time when they'd marry outside the camp, it went poorly. They went the direction of that, just as Solomon did. So the Old Testament makes it very clear, do not be unequally yoked. God was very serious about it. Why would we change that in Christianity?
I hope we've illustrated the point here.
Don't do it.
Just don't do it.
Do not do it. Well, she's a really good person. She's a Christian, quote unquote. She's not Church of Christ, but she believes some things in Scripture. Can she adequately sit down and study with somebody? Can she, if the roles were reversed, could she bring you to Christ? Does she know enough? And if that's not the case, how is she going to bring your kids to Christ?
Let me specify one more thing. We've still got 2 more categories to get to, and I think the coworker one is going to be very interesting.
Yeah,
so
that
I'll
is
leave time
actually,
for that. But I want to specify one more thing. I am not saying don't ever start a relationship with somebody who is not a Christian. I'm not saying that, because I do think there is a certain level of, okay, maybe this girl does go to community church, but she's got a really tender heart and is a really good person. Study with them. That's a great opportunity for you and your family to study with her, maybe study with her and her family. What I'm saying is don't tie the knot. Don't put a ring on it. Do not pursue marriage necessarily with that girl until she is on our team, so to speak, until she becomes a Christian. I wanted to kind of differentiate those two, because I understand some people might say, well, you shouldn't even pursue it. But I do think there are people who are really good-hearted people and are even religious and spiritual, but they maybe they don't go to a Church of Christ or whatever it is. I'm not even necessarily saying you should never even pursue a relationship with that person, but you darn sure should not get married to them. And so that's where the hard work's got to come in of, I really want to be with this girl. I got some work in front of me. I've got to see, is she willing to study these things? And hopefully she is. Is her family willing to study these things? And you can get her to that point, and again, hopefully convert her and get married to her. But at the end of the day, there's a big difference in, I really want to, maybe pursue this girl, and I want to marry this girl. There's a difference there, and so that would make a difference. I don't know if you agree, but I would make a differentiation there.
Here's what I would say. 2 things to that. First off, I think you need to make sure she's a Christian before you get anywhere close to serious about it. And the reason why I say that is, how many times has somebody been baptized because that's what the boyfriend or that's what the fiance or whatever wanted to? Okay, yeah. And then they fold. We had friends growing up. Their dad had the same thing. The woman was a Christian. He was not. He ended up coming to Christ, got baptized. She ends up dying. Tragically, it ends up dying. And he walks away from the faith. It was never really his faith. It was her faith.
Yeah.
It was her faith. It was for her, but he never really had it. And the kids subsequently fell away. So that's a very scary thing. If they're only changing because of you, be very careful on that. The reason why I would say entering into the relationship, keep it on the friendship level. Talk to them as though, because once relationships and feelings are involved and things like that, emotional connection, it makes it a lot more difficult. I'm not saying don't. The other thing I would say, I guess 3 points. The other thing I would say is they need to have a pretty good understanding of God. If you're coming from agnostic atheist, they know nothing to, I'm going to marry them in 6. That is not the same. They've grown up in church, maybe a different church, but they have a really open heart for God. Okay, they get baptized, but they also know their Bible really well. That's way different than the person who did not grow up in church, has no concept of God at all, and you want to marry her within 6 months. No, I'm sorry, she does not know enough.
That's a great point.
Sounds mean, but she doesn't know enough. The third thing I was going to say is I do think the rules change for girls to boys. For boys to find a girl and to help, I think that's different than a girl finding somebody who knows nothing about it, converting him. He's got to lead. How in the world can he lead when she knows 10 times about Scripture, 10 times as much? He may get there. He may get there for sure, and it has been done. It's a lot harder, and it's a huge uphill battle. He has to have the perfect heart to want to lead and to want to grow at a very fast pace. Most of the time, the guys don't. And so it ends up, the woman always ends up being the spiritual head while fighting against that inclination because she doesn't want to be, but he won't lead because he doesn't really know. So those things, they matter. If you are a female watching this, I would make sure to the best of your ability, try to pick a strong male. And you could say, well, there's none of them out there. Go join, look at our Discord and I'll tell you otherwise. We got a lot of young guys that are really coming up well to the Lord. So that's the only thing I'd say. That I agree with your point in the fact that not everything has to be perfect. They don't have to have their own PhD in the Bible before you start dating them, type of thing. On the other hand,
like I guess I know there's a lot of, I'm sure there's a lot of girls out there who go to community church and all that who, if they were studied with, they'd probably
good-hearted people.
Yeah,
know
really
the Bible.
people.
They care about God. That's what we're looking for.
Exactly.
But
Joe's right. You got to be very careful about furthering those emotional connections because then the temptation will be, oh man, she's really close. Let's go and get married. And we'll
change, right?
We'll keep studying. Yeah, and that just doesn't work a lot of time. All right, let's zoom through this next one because we talked about it before. But being unequally yoked with friends. And the question I put on here is, why would you want to be super close with someone who is that, again, to use the phrase, ideologically opposed to you?
Yeah.
If it's somebody who you're going to want to spend a lot of time with, hang out with, go out to eat with, watch movies with, do all these things, I guess my question would be, why would you want to be super close with that person if you know you're just on different pages? It is similar to marriage, but in a way, I mean, this one is like you're just going to be hanging out, having a good time. So you can say, man, we don't have to believe the same to, go to the movies and all that. And I'm not saying it's a sin to have a non-Christian friend. I certainly have had people that I would consider friends that were not Christians before. But it's more so, I guess I'm more so talking about like your best friend, like to truly dive into a deeper, less shallow relationship with a friend. I kind of see it very similar to marriage. Joe, what thoughts would you have for the friend one? Like, I don't want to say, again, that you only need to be within the Church of Christ to have friends. I don't think so necessarily. But there is a certain level of how ideologically opposed are we?
Yeah, I mean, the lack of covenant makes a difference, but I still agree with your point. I think the point still stands, which is if you have somebody who either makes fun of God or has nothing to do with God or is, anything like that, like, nope. If you have a person who's genuinely I had a lot of hockey buddies growing up, genuinely good-hearted, but the ideological split shows up and we have, for the most part, kind of separated ways because you start seeing, especially as I got older, we are going in completely different directions. When they started to drink and they started to smoke weed and things like that, I don't do any of those things with it. So we are like the behaviors will start following the ideology. And when you're young, that doesn't show up quite as much. Yeah. When you get older, high school, college, things like that, the divide should happen. And if it doesn't happen, it's probably not great either. If there's not a divide there.
I'm not really as much talking about the people who are really strong believers and all that. It is like the people who don't really have a moral compass.
Correct. Yes, that's
like,
a great
why
point.
would
No
you
moral
want
compass.
to spend any additional time with them if they look at whatever they want on their phone, watch whatever they want, smoke whatever they want, like all those things. Like,
right. Crack open a cold one and ask if you want to drink. No.
Yeah.
No.
Or, hey, we're having this party, you come in type of thing. Like, no, just stay away from that. But we talked about that before, Joe. I want to get to this last one.
Yeah.
Being unequally yoked with your coworkers. This, to me, is the most nuanced one because there's a certain level to which it's like, okay, I'm working at this place.
It's just a job.
It's just a job.
Sure.
It's just business. We're not, I do find it hard to believe that when Paul was writing that, he had in mind of like the person that sits beside you at your desk or again, like the people that you work with every day. And so I don't want to make it a stretch and say that you got to not be unequally yoked as far as like coworkers go. But the question I have is there a point in which you should leave your job? Is there a point in which you should maybe look to do something else because of your coworkers and because of maybe whether it be influence or maybe you feel like you are being unequally yoked? I think it can apply. But Joe, what are your thoughts on that? I've got some thoughts on it, but I was curious your thoughts.
We got a listener, godly man, that has this. I'm sure I think he still listens. Had this very situation where really negative coworkers just brought him down, bad language. Every time he showed up, like they made being a Christian and being a good person hard because they would make fun of him for it, they would persecute him for it, and give him a hard time. Like every time he tried to make the right decision, bounce. See ya. I don't want to be part of that. If I'm going to if I have another option at all, which I think he did, if I have another option to go find another job where I'm not going to be persecuted openly for my beliefs, I'm going to go do that. We live in a free country. I think there is a time and place where you go, man, this is really weighing on me. Mm-hmm. Like it's wearing me down. Maybe I'm more prone or more tempted to want to cuss, to want to drink, to want to be more like them. Or I'm not, and it's just ticking me off. The bitterness and the resentment toward them is really building. Well, that's not great either. We don't want that. So if you're seeing that it's weighing on you quite a bit because of how bad it is, I don't have any problem for somebody to go, we're completely separate. I don't think we're moving in the same direction, and this is wearing me down, and I don't want that to happen. So yeah, I do think there is a point where I think you should leave.
I agree. I think it depends on the job.
Yeah.
I think if you are just kind of, maybe you're working at a factory or you're working in an environment where there's a bunch of other people, but you kind of get to do your own thing, you're at your own desk or whatever, like, obviously I don't think that's going to be a huge deal. There are other jobs, though, where you do have to work incredibly, like, the example I thought of is, like, if I was a content creator or something and I had to, my podcast co-host was an atheist or whatever, we're pretty closely connected working on the same stuff, that would be tough for me. Obviously that's a bit more of an extreme example, but you think about, I'll never encourage my kids to go into the entertainment industry. Why? Because Hollywood is a disaster. Like, there's just certain elements of the people that you're with, the people that you work closely with, they can affect you, and they often do affect you. But again, like a lot of jobs, that's not really going to be the case, in the sense of you can do your job. Yes, you have meetings and you'll have, people that you interact with, coworkers and all those things, but it's not like you're spending a ton of time with them to where it can affect you. And so again, it's a bit of a tangent on this discussion, but I thought it'd be an interesting question to bring up because, listen, there's jobs out there, there's coworkers out there that, as Joe talked about, make it hard to be a Christian. And make it difficult. I think that's something worth discussing.
I bring in 1 Corinthians 5:9. He says, I wrote you in my letter not to associate with immoral people. This is in the context of disfellowshipping the man for sleeping with his father's wife. He says in verse 10, I did not at all mean with the immoral people of this world, or with the covetous and swindlers, or with idolaters, for then you would have to go out of the world. Paul is not idealistic in the point of, like, we will be around them, no doubt. And that's your point. Like, we will be around these people. We can't avoid these people completely. And the question is, are we setting ourselves up for success in the future? Are we setting ourselves up for a better, again, this is assuming you do have other options out there. If this is your one job, and then the only chance you have, or this is if you can push through for 2 years, you're going to get your apprenticeship, whatever it is, right? Okay, there are reasons to stay. We're not saying, same with friends, you can't have atheist friends, you can't have people that are, be very careful with those. And I like the clarification of best friends. You're really doing life together. You're with them all the time. Those things, those splits will show up. And same with coworkers, where every day is a challenge. Every day you're showing up in this way. Paul is saying, look, let's be realistic. You're going to be around these people, no doubt. You had a lot of Gentile, I'm sure Gentile bosses at the time who were probably sacrificing things to idols and everything else. You can't quit your job. But we're not in Corinth, first century Corinth. We are in America, where there are other opportunities and options, Lord willing, hopefully, right, with whatever it may be. And so just be aware of these things, the anti-God philosophy, the cheating people, especially if the job is immoral in that way, the language that's used, the sexual perversion, they're trying to show you porn, all those things. Just be aware of how that's weighing on you, how it's grinding you down over time, and be willing to stand up against it. The main point of this in the unequally yoked, as we're talking, is just ideologically opposed. That phrase, yet again, ideologically opposed. I would challenge, as godly men, look around your life. How many people do you have in your life that are ideologically opposed to you, and are you cozying up to them, or are you setting boundaries? I would say set some boundaries. Doesn't mean you have to cut them out completely. Be careful with those people. If you are looking to join or to enter into a relationship with somebody who's not, or who has nothing to do with God, knows nothing of God, but she's a really nice person, I'm sorry, but cut that off. I'd be strongly opposed to anything like that, because, well, what if she comes around to Christ? Okay, don't enter into the relationship. Bring her around to Christ. See if she's willing to as friends before any emotion comes in. Just some things to think about, but do not marry one who is a non-Christian. Biblically speaking, I think we can. I think we stand.
Just
together.
made the case.
I think we just made the case. And if you have another case that, if you want to comment and have something to say against it, okay, we'd be happy to discuss it further. But I do think the case is very strong for that specifically. So, Will, anything else you'd add to this?
I don't think so. So. Thank y'all so much for joining us. This has been episode 104 of the Godly Young Men podcast. We'll be back next week.